Observation 1 is the resolutional analysis. The 8th one is the resolution. The European Central Bank should act to reduce deflationary pressure in the Eurozone. The European Central Bank should act to reduce deflationary pressure in the Eurozone. The B's point is that everything in the resolution ought to be contextual. We'll clarify if necessary. The C's point is that you should evaluate the round through criteria of net benefits and ultimately decide the round based on impact calculus. Observation 2 is the background. The first argument is that the European Central Bank kept interest rates at 0.25% last week, and the fear is that because they did not decrease that rate, that deflationary pressure will drive out investment because people don't want to buy in an area where it's more expensive. The second argument is that absent the selling of bonds, the European recovery will be delayed because it costs too much to invest from inside and outside. The third argument is that investors are afraid because the European Central Bank looks quote-unquote hawkish, and then they do not change the rates, which means that they don't trust the economy. The fourth argument is that several AAA rating countries don't want Eurobonds because they technically be responsible for the pig's debt, which means that Eurobonds will be passed now. That's the plan. The European Central Bank shall act to reduce deflationary pressure in the Eurozone by issuing bonds to the amount of 175 billion euros. It's a resolution by issuing bonds to the amount of 175 billion euros.
Any questions?
Not right now.
Okay.
The advantage is the EU economy. Subpoint A is the uniqueness that the collapse of the EU economy is inevitable in the status quo. The first argument is debt. Ireland's yield on 10-year bonds is equal to 8.97%, which led Moody's Investor Services to cut the debt rating by 5 different levels. Greece is even worse off. Their 10-year yield is up to 12.01%, which makes it nearly impossible to finance anything within the nation. But furthermore, the cost of insuring French debt is also equal to the is rising to record highs and has been rising since 2010. The second warrant is housing bubble. Portugal, Ireland, Italy, and Greece and Spain all had huge crashes as a result of the excess expenditure prior to the 2008 housing collapse and have structurally depressed since. The unsound derivatives and easy money provided that resulted in the popping of the bubble have structurally depressed the securities surrounding these industries. The third argument is gross domestic product. The GDP of the European Union is hanging on by a thread. The EU GDP is 16.6 trillion and Germany provides 3.7 trillion of that. Other countries require subsidies in order for their economies to sustain themselves, which indicates the Eurozone is having a drain in their economy because the European Union has to spend that money to keep the economies afloat. The fourth argument is that makes economic collapse inevitable. The little a is that without the ability to increase production means the pigs, or the Portugal, Italy, Ireland, and Greece and Spain will inevitably become more dependent on subsidies. The little b is that this leads to hyperinflation because the Eurozone has to increase the printing of the euro in order to be able to sustain those economies, the Eurozone as a whole. The little c is that this means investors fly because there's no production that's happening in the countries for them to be invested. But additionally, the EU, they perceive the EU ship is sinking, which means that they don't want to be a part of drowning. The little d is that no investment plus inflation crashes the trade and growth because it's impossible to support trade and you can't buy resources because you can't invest in the provided infrastructure necessary to produce those the economic growth, which means the economy has essentially collapsed. The fifth argument is that the collapse goes global. First is that German manufacturing is basically keeping the economy on a thread right now, but the 2008, this will be like the 2008 housing crash, but it will be the entire EU. The housing crash in the United States had huge implications for the European Union, and when the entire European Union goes down, it means the entire globe goes down. The beast one is the impacts. First impact is war. The little a is that economic collapse hopefully leads to nationalism. This is empirically proven from Great Britain into the 1700s and to Germany in World War I and World War II. Whenever the economy collapses, it encourages aggressive nationalism. Little b is that it also erodes economic interdependence within these nations because of the fact that when they're not economically interdependent on each other, then war becomes thinkable because of the fact that they're not dependent on them for resources. Little c is that in a world of economic collapse, that means the major superpowers of this region has to jockey for the remaining resources necessary to sustain their economies and growth within their population. This means that they ultimately go to war with each other in an attempt to make sure that their population survive, but this leads to the launching of nuclear weapons. The little d is that they have to launch nuclear weapons in order to compete with other big nations like the United States and China, which indicates that they would launch nuclear weapons at each other, and in retaliation because ultimately try or die in this instance. Nuclear weapons ultimately cause extinction because in a world in which they launch nuclear weapons and it retaliates, it means it kicks up dust and blocks out the sun, but also causes asymmetrical gene mutation, which indicates that we can't breed, so we all die within one generation. The second impact is poverty. The little a is that a lack of production and no growth collapses the job market, but because of the fact that they're not hiring because they're not producing anything. The little b is that this also spikes the amount of layoffs because in a world in which they're not getting foreign direct investment because they're flying, that means that people are not getting the investment necessary to be able to sustain their economic growth. It leads to investor flight and causes people to lay them off. The cease points is that whenever you don't have a job, you obviously can't afford a house because of the fact that you have to make payments on your home, which ultimately results in a cycle of poverty because in a world in which your kids grow up poor and you can't afford to send them to get education, it means that it becomes a cycle of poverty that's generational. The little d is that poverty is ultimately dehumanizing because individuals look down upon you as though you are not capable of or as though it's your fault that you are in poverty. But additionally, is the internally to all violence. There have been instances in which homeless people have been set on fire literally because teenagers felt like they were not human. The third impact is biodiversity collapse. The little a is that economic collapse ultimately leads to the hyper-destruction of the environment because they rationalize that destruction of the environment is necessary to be able to maintain economic growth. So they exploit the environment through the little b is that they use the worst forms of environmental destruction, like strip mining and deforestation, in order to sell the produce from the natural environment. This leads to destruction of biospheres because in a world in which you're just literally destroying the environment at any point to be able to get access to any kind of economic profit means that you'll destroy any part of the biosphere that's necessary. The little c is that biosphere collapse ultimately goes global because all biospheres are necessarily interconnected, and Earth life is necessary to sustain Earth life. The little d is that this ultimately results in extinction because whenever the collapse goes global, it ultimately it prevents us from having access to food like fish, but also kills off all life on Earth because we're not able to get access to we all die because we don't have any food or anything like that. Also kills off phytoplankton, which was 80% of our oxygen. You should evaluate this through the precautionary principle because we don't know which species is the most important. The C point is solvency. The first argument is that according to the Wall Street Journal on March 14th, the euro rate needs $175 billion more euro. They need the plan to increase liquidity in the banking system to be able to borrow and cheaply make loans so that the economies do not collapse. The second argument is that this also. They also share the liability for debt, which means they're interconnected with each other more, so that increases the propensity for trade, which means that growth also increases. The third argument is also allows growth because it increases inflation. That supports foreign direct investment because individuals rationalize that it's cheaper to buy things in the Eurozone, which means that they will invest in production in those areas. That sells back to the poverty impact because in a world in which you're investing in production, increase the propensity for the job market to be able to stall back. But the fourth argument is also creates a stable growth within the European Union because of the fact that they have bonds to make sure that their currency stays inflated enough so that people will always want to invest domestically as well, which means that they don't have kind of outsourcing or anything of that nature.
Alright. I will go one off, and then I will go on advantage one, and then if you'd like to put a solvency sheet on the bottom, you can make some generic case arguments there.
Do you guys have this offload on more than one sheet?
No, no criticism. Anybody not ready? Cool. The first off-case position is the disadvantage on Russia backlash. The ace of point is the uniqueness. The first argument is that European Union and Russia relations are high right now. The little a is that you can look to the massive oil and natural gas exchange that happens between the two countries, between the EU and Russia. The little b is that you can look to the EU and Russia summit in December of 2011 that led to an increase in cooperation and to these countries discussing with each other all future policy changes that implicated one another. The little c is that they have created 4 common spaces as a result of that 2011 discussion. The first and the most important is the economic space, where they make their economies compatible in order to be able to increase trade between the EU and Russia. They also created the space of freedom, safety, and justice, of external security, and of research and education. They believe strongly in participating with one another and identifying with one another each other's policy objectives before doing anything else. The second argument here is that Russia is heavily reliant on European Union economic ties. The little a is that 52.3% of all foreign trade in Russia is with the European Union, and the little b is that 75% of direct foreign investment stocks are from the European Union. So the two are very dramatically interconnected, and the price of the euro dramatically impacts the amount of goods that Russia is able to sell and the amount of stocks that they are able to sell into the European Union. The B subpoint is the... Sorry, Corey, did you want something else?
Also, the issue of Crimea is only a temporary issue and does not reflect actual economic ties.
Right. Moreover, the issue of Crimea is only a temporary issue and does not reflect their economic ties and is only a foreign policy consideration outside of the economy, thus isolating it from consideration within economic considerations for Russia. The B subpoint is the link. The first argument here is that the EU devalues its currency through its inflation measures. Whenever you issue $175 billion of bonds on one day, your currency massively devalues because you have artificially created a considerably larger amount of currency. What this means is that there is now a trade differential in favor of the European Union, and Russia considers this to be a currency devaluation that is targeted at their direct investments, because it will necessarily mean that the purchasing power of individuals in the EU is lower. Thus, Russia will sell fewer goods to the EU and less investment will come into Russia because the euro will be able to be exchanged for fewer rubles. The second link is that Russia, I already read the second link. The third link here is that they lose the value of the euro, that is, of euros that are being held in Russia right now, means that previous bonds that Russians have taken out from the European Union are effectively devalued, because while they're paid back the same dollar or the same euro amount by number, it has lower purchasing power, thus devaluing the investment of Russians. The CISA point are the internal links. The first argument here is that Russia perceives this as a violation of their partnership agreement. The little a is that as a result, Russia is going to pull out of the trade agreements that they have with the European Union, where normal process right now is for them to consult one another before doing something as dramatic as change to currency valuation. The second argument here is that as a result, Russia is going to backlash against the European Union by cutting off access to the gas pipelines, because at the point at which they see this as the initiation of a trade war between the European Union and Russia, because they have agreed with each other in the past to make agreements with one another and post-consultation with one another, this will be seen as an instance of the EU essentially flipping them off and saying that our trade considerations need to be tantamount over yours. Therefore, Russia will backlash. The disappoint are the impacts. The first argument here is that the gas supply is critical to the European Union. The little a argument under this is that they provide 50% of the natural gas that goes to the European Union right now. The little b argument is that without natural gas, places like the small municipal power plants that are used to meet the regional demands in places in the European Union are no longer able to operate. This means that during the peak times of day when business is happening, there is going to be power shortages and rolling blackouts, which is going to collapse the EU economy at the point at which their firms are no longer able to operate. But the little c argument under this is that this also removes their ability to heat themselves. While it might be warming up in the United States right now and most of the European Union, it's still really cold, and not having access to heat, particularly in older buildings that don't have very good insulation, means that these individuals are going to have a dramatically higher risk of dying from exposure, or at least getting threatening diseases or threatening health conditions like hypothermia that will result in them needing to go to the hospitals that don't actually have the power to operate right now because their natural gas generators aren't running and the natural gas power plants aren't running either. This means that we lead to individuals in the European Union being at a dramatically higher risk of death and dramatically lower probability of being able to access the economy. You can cross-apply all of their poverty impacts right here. These individuals are never going to get access to getting out of poverty when they don't have heat or a job to go to because their company can't open the doors because their computers are off for the day. On advantage one, or the advantage. Couple of arguments that I want to go for here. The first argument that I want to look to is at the impact level. Their impact level suggests that we are going to see wars break out as a result of nationalism. However, the 2008 collapse discredits this. Several European nations had pretty considerable economic declines, and there was absolutely no scenario that led to the brink of war here. There simply aren't warrants to support this impact scenario. The second impact scenario that they go for is poverty, but the first answer here is that the resolution of this is temporary at best because they are making a one-shot effort at controlling inflation, not a continuous effort. It means that even if they resolve it for now, this is just going to be rolled back into the future. The next argument that they make is that dehumanization of poverty is the internal link to all violence, but there is literally no warrant here. Don't grant them the link to all violence. Violence can be caused by a dramatic host of other things other than poverty. There are considerable alternative causes such as racial tensions and national violence. The third impact scenario that they go for is BioD, leading to collapse of the world. The first argument is that that they aren't going to access new investment, and so as a result, they aren't. when there isn't new investment in the EU because of this currency devaluation, then there isn't a reason to believe the scenario where all of a sudden there are going to be dramatically more companies that are doing the strip mining that they isolate as the internal link to BioD collapse. The next argument is that we have already lost 99 keystone species in the...
99%.
Sorry, 99% of keystone species in the status quo means that there is no reason to believe that one keystone species dying triggers collapse outside of other biospheres, means that there is no reason to believe this scenario. They simply don't have the warrants here. But on their solvency arguments that they make, their link arguments, they say they specifically isolate that individuals are not investing in the European Union right now. This is at your link level. Then they say they read their own no solvency because people aren't going to buy these bonds because they don't want to carry the debt of the PIGS countries. They say that this is the problem right now, and they don't isolate how the plan is able to change this. Means that they are never going to be getting access to solvency on any of these arguments because nobody wants to carry the debt of the European Union. The European Union is a volatile investment right now, and they don't explain why investors are going to be willing to do that. Means they don't win the debate.
It's going to be the advantage and then the disadvantage. This is a simple roadmap. Obviously, if you can't understand me, you'll let me. Yeah. Okay. I also flowed his argument straight down, so like I didn't go impacts and links, but I'll tell you where I am in the flow.
Yeah.
Okay. Y'all good?
Yep.
Okay. On the ABs, the first argument they say is that 2008 disproves this. The first response to this would be much worse than 2008, which was just a recession, not a global economic collapse. I think the affirmative isolates how an economic collapse is inevitable in the status quo. They concede on multiple arguments. Specifically, number one, that Ireland and Greece debt is extremely high in the status quo. No change means that they would result in economic collapse. But they also concede that number two, that we're on the brink because of 2008. They also concede the argument that GDP is not enough to be sustained in the status quo, and concede that number four, with the multiple levels of why economic collapse is inevitable in the status quo, you shouldn't concede our uniqueness to these arguments. This proves why this is uniquely worse, but also the next argument I want is that we also have instances that after the world wars were a result of economic decline of Germany, they had hyperinflation, which is what resulted in Hitler blaming the rest of the world, which is what justification of war was. That's at least a result of why war happened. They just say 2008 disproves. I think the next one was that 2008 would result in massive decrease of the global economy. At least it didn't result in collapse, but now we're on the brink in the status quo. This is just uniqueness for us. The next argument they say that we only provide temporary solvency. The first response is that that's not true. We signal we shift the policy focus of the status quo from austerity measures, which is what the EU has right now, to growth measures, which is what most political leaders seem to indicate are the best way to resolve the economic crisis in the region. These growth measures are whenever there's inflation in the country can then afford to invest internally in development, so we can invest in new infrastructure for different parts of the EU rather than just exporting things, which means that it's best for internal development of different projects. That is how inflation works. Now, in a world where their currency has more value, this means that they get more internal investment, which is long-term solvency. But the next argument I want is that also it's a signal of growth measures, which means that there will be no rollback in the future. That the only reason that Germany has not done this in status quo is because it is posturing, and they are just saying that maybe they won't take any action. They don't make any status quo solves argument, which I think means that we only have a risk of solving the advantage. They don't have a risk of doing that in status quo. No reason that rollback would ever occur. They don't provide any warrant. They just say that they won't like this. I'll answer this more later. The third argument, they say that there's no warrant to violence because of poverty. First response is that I think to provide pretty good warrant to provide you the example of in Florida where a homeless man was set on fire because he was seen as subhuman. Even if this doesn't result in nuclear war, it still results in inevitable atrocities against individuals. If I see you as subhuman, it's the same as seeing you as a roach where I can squash you. That means that the impacts are always inevitable. We have pretty good warrants to eternally to all violence. Next, they say all causes. The first response is that individuals in poverty are much more likely to experience violence because they are of a different race. In fact, African Americans are more likely to be in poverty than white individuals or non-black bodies, which is the reason why we at least resolve these issues. But even if there are alternative causes, we should at least try to reject every single instance of dehumanization in a world of the affirmative. They don't have any reason why they were to solve these issues. I'm fine. They don't have any reason why they resolve issues of race or violence. I think we at least resolve these issues. Next, they say that we don't get new investment because they use devalued, so no strip mining. First response is that they concede all of our solvency arguments coming out of the PNC as to why we have access to new types of investment. They concede the argument. The Wall Street Journal indicates that they need 175 billion euros to resolve these issues, and it's not just one time. It signals a long-term change in policy by the European Central Bank. But they also concede the argument that they share debt liability, which means that individuals are more likely to invest in the EU because instead of just seeing it as being bad because of the PIG countries, they are sharing debt with France, with Germany, Germany with the other powerful countries in the EU, but they also concede our argument that it allows for growth to occur because of the increase in inflation and allows for stable growth of the EU currency, which allows for investment. It shouldn't concede all of our solvency, which means the strip buying would inevitably occur, but I'm probably not going to expand diversity scenario anyway, so it doesn't even matter to say, the next one they say 90% is species extinct, send across, we're not going for biodiversity. Next one they say that people won't buy the bonds because they don't want the big exact couple responses. The first response to that is, the first response was the European Central Bank has never done this before. The European Central Bank has never issued bonds, and the status quo, it is banks that exist within each individual country. That's why there are problems with the status quo, because Ireland's central bank is not as powerful as the European Central Bank. When the European Central Bank takes action, that's like the Federal Reserve versus state banks. The difference is that when the ECB does something, it is Germany, France, Ireland, Portugal, all those countries acting together, which means that they're sharing debt, which means that it's not as risky of an investment as the status quo. That's why the bonds work and why we get access to investment. They're not afraid of pig debt anymore because the pigs are now protected by France and Germany and other powerful countries. Now, when you sit across the entire scenario, it means we get 100% access to solvency and we turns on your disk. I don't want you to sit across the unique that already did that, sit across the impact scenario that war is an inevitable result of this, a class results in nationalism. They also concede our argument that it results in a lack of interconnected economic independence, class of neoliberalism, which means that superpowers go to war for resources, which means the nuclear extinction is inevitable. I can see the entire scenario. We at least get access to conventional war, which still results in millions of individuals dying, but I also want to sit across the poverty scenario. We solve back for issues of poverty and layoffs, which means it solves back for demonization on their dissent. The first argument that poverty is inevitable in a world of status quo. No reason why you do anything to solve back for this. Only risk for resolves this issues of poverty that you isolate. But the next argument I want is that I think is an entirely laughable scenario that people can't go to their jobs because there aren't computers. We had jobs before we had electricity. Probably the reason why not everybody would just automatically lose their job. But the next argument I want is that Russia would not cut off their natural gas. This is just posturing. Russia knows that if they cut off their natural gas, they would lose huge amounts of profits. Reason why they would never cut off to Europe. But even if this is true, it would only be Eastern Europe, which is the only ones that get their natural gas from Russia, not Western Europe. The next argument I want is that generators to be able to solve. They aren't completely relying on natural gas. They still have that other 50% of power, so they can use other means to at least supply themselves. Maybe they'd have brownouts, but no reason why they would have complete blackouts and no access to power. The next argument I want is that the United States would always be able to fill in. We are now one of the largest producers of natural gas in the entire world. No reason why the United States could not fill in by improving LNG exports to Western Europe or Eastern Europe. If they need our assistance, we will send them access to we will send them natural gas. The next argument I want is the EU is also transitioning to nuclear power in the status quo. This has been a huge thing in the European Union. They're also transitioning to other types of alternative energy, which is the reason why natural gas is not necessarily key to their solvency. But the next argument I want is that the EU has already had a meeting at the Basel Committee, which indicated that the ECB is ready to take action. They don't know what that action will be yet, which is why the plan is absolutely necessary, because they have literally no idea what they're doing for some reason. But this is the reason why Russia would already have freaked out. The next argument I want is a non-unique that the European Union will try to get away from natural gas, and the status quo probably proves their scenario is not true because they're already trying to make their economic ties, because they're trying to transition to other alternative fuels. But the next argument is non-unique that 2011 seen in old cooperation. A lot of economic ties have changed since then. So the next one I want is a non-unique. Don't buy this malarkey about Ukraine not mattering. I think Ukraine absolutely matters, because in a world where our NATO allies are at risk, such as Poland and other NATO allies that are around the Ukraine, the European Union is inevitably going to sever some type of economic ties with Russia, which means that their scenario is terminally non-unique. The next one I want is a non-unique that Russia does not participate in, does not get access to economic ties with Europe. They can't invest in Europe because it's seen as a risky investment. The status quo only risk that we resolve these issues. The next one I want is a term that we help the economy. We help these ties because we allow for the EU to invest more in local development, which allows for them to increase exports, and eventually, within the long term, even in the short term, which allows for it to be less seen as a risky investment. But the next one I want is a term is also better. The next one I want is a term that Russia can now buy off Euro bonds, because there's not just a limit on bonds. They now have 100, however much we said in the plan text, which means they can buy off bonds just like China buys off treasury bills from the United States. See, Russia can buy off Euro bonds from the European Union, which means they can still engage in economic investment with the European Union. But the next one I want is the term, since you can see that economic collapse is inevitable in the status quo, I think we're running pretty compelling arguments that we at least have a risk of resolving this economic collapse, which means that Russia can invest more. Obviously, they can't invest in the economy if it doesn't exist, which means that we at least resolve this scenario, because they can now invest in the European Union, and it's still a risky investment because the pigs aren't just there being a walking risk for them. They now are sharing that debt with Germany and France and the other powerful nations in the EU, which means there's not a risk. It's not as risky of investment, which means investment is only likely to increase. But the next argument I want is that you cannot get foreign direct investment when the economy is failing. The impacts of what is here conceded, which means that Russia cannot sell in the status quo because the economy will inevitably fail. Only a risk that the app resolves this and our advantages.
It's going to be the disad, and case, and the advantage, solvency. No, it's the same. I mean, I have like some new arguments, but like there's not gonna be like a bunch of new case terms. That's what you meant.
That was interesting.
Okay.
It's actually just 8 minutes of case terms.
Is everybody ready? Okay.
You'll be voting for Nevada at the end of this round, both because of the fact that we we are triggering they are going to trigger the economic collapse sooner, but also because of the fact that that means that they are going to be leading to that we get the higher impacts and the more probable impacts through the scenario. We are conceding the entirety of our arguments about why natural gas is key to the development and the key to the access for people to have heating. All of their arguments about alternative energies don't function in a world where you can't use solar power to heat your house. It means there's no reasons why they're going to get access. It means that this is going to be key. Starting with their specific arguments. The first argument is that poverty is inevitable in the status quo and that they only the plan resolves poverty. First, we say that all of their arguments of economic collapse don't have a time frame to them. All of them are way down the road. Our argument here is that especially since the European debt crisis has been happening for so long, specifically has been happening for like over 2 to 3 years, it means there's probably no reasons why the collapse is going to happen soon. It means that even if it's inevitable, there's no reasons why it's going to happen soon. It means that their triggering of the dissent now is going to outweigh. Additionally, the next argument they make here is that we had jobs before electricity. That may be true, but the economy has developed to such a point where we need electricity and we need the ability to heat things like businesses in order to be able to have access. Means that you are triggering an internal poverty scenario when you prevent access to heating. Means that only the plan triggers these externalized impacts.
It's pretty difficult for desk workers to do their job without a computer to do it.
Yeah, it's also pretty difficult for desk workers or like computer programmers to do any of their jobs when their computer doesn't work because of the fact that they don't have electricity. We're winning these internal arguments about why natural gas especially is key to things like electricity. You can look at all of our analysis that says that the European Union relies on natural gas for a lot of their electricity. You can look at the specific statistic that 52.4% of the natural gas that the European Union uses comes from natural gas. And specifically, you can look at the fact that 95% of natural gas that the European uses comes from Russia. It means that the shutdown of this pipeline necessarily triggers all of these impacts faster. The next argument to make here is that Russia is not
just posturing.
Oh, that Russia's just posturing and they would lose a lot of their profits. Our first argument here is that you can look at the fact that Russia has shut down the pipeline before. These 2 years ago, you can look at the fact that Russia shut down the pipeline, especially in early January, in order to have an influence on the policy of the European Union. It means that this is necessarily true. They turned it back on like 2 weeks later, but there were still harms between that. I'll get to you at the bottom of the dissent. The next argument you can look to is they make the argument that it's only going to affect Eastern Europe. You can look to the fact that no, this is absolutely not true. You can look at the fact that France gets 95% of its natural gas from Russia. It means that this is absolutely still true. Additionally, second, say that even if you still cause the collapse in Eastern Europe, it's probably going to affect the entire European Union. It means there's no reason as to why your scenario is still true. Additionally, the next argument you make here is about how they're still going to have power. This is absolutely not true. You can look at the fact that the European Union relies on natural gas for the access to electricity. Means that your argument here is not true. The next argument you make here is that the United States is able to fill in. First, we say that there's no infrastructure to be able to transport this to Europe. Our argument here is that the pipeline is the only ability for easy and quick transference of natural gas from into Europe. Means that it's only key. Any ability to transfer natural gas from the United States to Europe would have to be by boat, and that's going to take a long time. First, second, you don't have the ability to transfer enough. It means there's no reasons to why your argument is true. The next argument you make here is that the European Union is shifting to nuclear energy, alternative energy. First, we say that this is not developed to the point in which it can take over entirely from natural gas. If that were true, then it probably would have already switched to that. It means that argument doesn't function. Second,
they're trying to decommission the nuclear facilities right now. Means they probably are critically needed.
Additionally, you can list the fact that they're trying to decommission their nuclear facilities in the status quo. That's a result of Japan, the Japanese nuclear crisis. Means that they're probably shifting away from those things in the status quo. It means this argument doesn't true. The next argument you make here is about the ECB has announced that they're ready to act, which means that Russia probably would have backlash. First, Russia didn't take this seriously because they didn't say what they were going to do. Your own argument disproves yourself here. It means there's no risk of backlash in the status quo. Additionally, second, you can look to all of our internal link analysis as consultation is key. That the ECB talked with Russia before the announcement, but your policy is going to necessarily skew this result. Means that you are still triggering the link to backlash. The next argument you make here is that economic ties have changed since 2011. All of our analysis, you can look to our more recent analysis, talks about how we still have strong economic ties with the European Union and Russia. Means that we are still getting a link to this scenario. The next argument you make here is that Ukraine still matters. First, we already preempted this argument. First, we say that the economic ties are always going to be more deeper, are going to be deeper than any chance of than the issue of Russia taking over part of Ukraine. Additionally, second to say that we've already gotten our licks in on this issue, that the European Union placed limited sanctions on individual Russian officials means that it's only a limited issue and not an overall collapse. I'll get to at the bottom of the disadvantage. The next argument you make here is the term that they're helping the European Union invest in local. First, we say that this has no influence to Russia's policy. Policy means this. Our term doesn't work. Additionally, second, we say that all of your arguments are much more long term. Our argument here is that a shift in policy now is going, and especially one that looks to devalue the value of the currency, is going to lead to more harmful effects. It means that you are still linking to this scenario. The next argument you make here is that Russia is going to buy the Eurobonds. First, to say there's no reason for Russia to invest. This argument that you do not provide a warrant as to why Russia would want to invest through these bonds means that you don't get access to issues. Second, to say that Russia has already bought up a lot of the European debt means that this is only fuels our link scenario and tell you that you are going to be devaluing the currency that they have already bought. It means that your argument doesn't work here. The next argument you make here is the term that economic collapse is inevitable means that risk of solvency acts as a term. First, to say that you're still going to be triggering this in time frame. You triggered the collapse now, which is probably worse because of the fact that it's going to lead to lack of access to lack of access to heating, which exacerbates all of your poverty and economy arguments, means that the disadvantage probably turns the case in this instance and makes the collapse happen faster. It means there's no access for you to be able to get access to this argument. You can spend all of the impacts of the coal conceding we are the only ones that get access to the specific natural gas arguments that lead to access to heating. It means that all of your argumentation about poverty is not only turned by the disadvantage, but we also get the externalized impact of access to heating. I'll take your question.
If the EU already put economic sanctions on Russia, I don't understand how that does not sever their economic ties.
The argument was limited sanctions on certain Russian officials, not the overall economic ties between the two countries that we've had these deep ingrained partnerships. Our argument here is that it was limited, they got it out of the way, and now they're moving on. Let's look to the advantage. First, we're going to be winning reasons as to why the disadvantage turns the case. You can look at the fact that it's going to be triggering the economic collapse faster because the fact that without access to things like heat to be able to function businesses is necessarily means there's no ability for it's going to trigger the collapse faster. Additionally, second, we're going to be winning time frame arguments about why the collapse is not going to happen. All of their warrants about Ireland and Greece are not functional in a world in which the debt crisis has been happening for 2 to 3 years, and we have not seen an overall collapse. And that things like austerity measures have prevented the collapse from happening. It means there's no reasons to why they're going to be getting a collapse anytime soon. It means that the time frame and the probability of the disadvantage are always going that way. Additionally, I want you to look to Jacob's specific analysis about how there's no risk of war as a result of...
Move on to solvency.
Okay, we're going to have solvency. We access all of the same economy impacts that just through this means that it's trigger faster. It means that you're going to be looking at solvency. They just do not resolve this issue of why people are not going to want to buy the debt. You can look to their own background analysis when they said that people are not going to want to be responsible for the pig's debt because they're concerned about the collapse of the overall European Union. It means there's no reasons why individuals are going to buy the debt. Additionally, once you look at the fact that this is going to look like a very unstable policy because the fact that they're issuing 175 million bonds at once. Our argument here is that this is a reason as to why investors are going to see this as very unstable and not want to invest in the first place. It means that we have terminal defense on the solvency discussion. It means that all of your arguments about collection don't matter in this world.
It's going to go... Actually, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'll go advantage 1, and then the solvency debate, and then the disad. I'll admit that my opponents are winning the uniqueness debate. The collapse is inevitable right now, but at the point at which the disadvantage says that they trigger that collapse, that they isolate as being coming down the road right now, that means that the disadvantage is going to outweigh on the time frame. At the point at which the disadvantage is the collapse they isolate, that means that we access all of their impacts far faster than they do because they literally do not have a time frame. They say that maybe one day that collapse is going to happen into the future, but they never isolate a specific time at which that is going to occur. It means that we are always going to be beating them on the time frame discussion. So let's look specifically to the advantage briefly. all of their uniqueness claims are just about how hyperinflation is going to lead to, or how dependency is going to lead to things like hyperinflation and investor flight. But at the point at which the problem that they're facing right now is actually deflation, this is probably not a reason to buy this scenario because it is still an entire economic move off. At the point, like the scenario that they isolate is that deflation turns into hyperinflation long down the road. But that does not happen immediately. They never read a time frame to this, and we are always going to be beating them on the time frame differential on the disadvantage. When this is their uniqueness coming out of the PMC, it's going to be pretty problematic when we have faster inroads to all of the impact scenarios that they are talking about, because we specifically isolate how this is going to lead to the collapse of the European economy faster, and even if it doesn't lead to absolute collapse, that it will still lead to enough market destabilization that it is going to trigger the same impact scenarios. Corey, do you want me to talk about anything else on the advantage?
Very good.
Okay, on this solvency debate. Their only hope in the PMR is to go for long-term solvency and say that even if there's a small market disruption right now, they're going to resolve into the future and push off the collapse into the future. But they're never going to be able to resolve this when they read their own no link to the solvency on this plan text. Because what their uniqueness says is that investors don't want to invest because they don't want to be responsible for the PIGS debt. Their only answer is that it's consolidated with other nations, but that still doesn't answer the fact that PIGS is still a very unstable region and that is very unattractive to investors. They simply don't answer this argument well enough to ever get access to enough long-term solvency to resolve the problems of the impact scenario that they're reading out of the PMC that are going to be triggered by the disadvantage. You can extend all of Corey's argumentation about how these are very unstable investments and they never are able to resolve this. Corey, you happy there?
Yep.
On the disad debate. Couple of important arguments from Corey's speech that I'm going to need you to extend. First, I want you to extend all of Corey's defense against their link turns. Their link turns simply are not contextualized enough to the specificity of the uniqueness debate here. Their arguments are that Russia is going to like it because they can buy European bonds, but we specifically tell you that issuing more bonds for the euro is just going to devalue Russia's pre-existing investments in the region as a result of currency devaluation, and when they never answer this prior in the debate today, they're not going to get new access to this in the PMR, and their argument in fact only proves that Russia is going to be more upset because the selling of bonds is going to devalue their current investments. The next argument that I want you to extend is straight out of the LOC shell, where I say that this is a trade-off, that Russia is going to be able to sell less goods when the euro is worth less, and that their investment from the European Union is going to be worth less when the euro is worth less. This is the link scenario that causes the Russian backlash. You can extend all of those arguments. Yes, Corey?
We also get the externalized impact of lack of access to heating.
Right, we also get the externalized impact of lack of access to heating that is a collapse scenario that is uniquely existent under the disadvantage as a reason why all of their poverty scenario is worst under the disad, and in fact is a reason why the disad is always going to outweigh, because the magnitude is dramatically larger when these individuals are freezing to death beyond just being impoverished. You can extend all of the impact scenarios out of the disadvantage. At the point at which we are beating back the link defense, we are going to be winning the debate.
Yours, the disad, it's an overview, disad, then the advantage. Is everybody good? If economic collapse is inevitable in the status quo, you do not have a unique impact within the debate that the affirmative does not access. But additionally, we will be winning arguments as to why there is a risk of a link turn on the disadvantage. Absent the plan, economic collapse will take place. That means you do not have a unique piece of offense. Unless you pass the plan, you get a risk of a link turn on the disadvantage, means that you probably vote affirmative. Disad. Extend the first argument indicates that poverty is inevitable in the status quo because of the fact that economic collapse is inevitable. They have conceded this coming out of the block. This means that their time frame analysis literally does not matter, because if the collapse goes global, which they have conceded, means that the entire world goes into poverty. We have nuclear war scenarios that we are winning on, which indicates that extinction happens. You do not have an impact that outweighs that debate, which means that this time frame argument literally does not matter. We have conceded 100% probability that economic collapse will happen in the status quo. That means the magnitude will ultimately outweigh. The next argument I want is the fifth argument that she makes, that the United States can fill in. Their only response is that we don't have the infrastructure for this, we won't be able to send enough. For the first response is that we have 13 LNG facilities that allow for us to be able to transport to Russia that can happen in the status quo. But additionally, we have LNG tankers that would be able to send more than enough. Probably means that there's a risk that the United States would be able to check back from this. This is not possible in a world of global economic collapse because the United States would not be sending it to others. They've conceded that it results in aggressive nationalism that results in war. Means we probably wouldn't be filling in a world of the affirmative, but only in a world of the dissad. You also want to extend across the seventh argument. It indicates that they already had the Brazil committee that indicates that Russia would have already the Basel committee that indicates that Russia would have already freaked out. Their response is that they didn't take it seriously because consultation is key and they didn't actually know what they were doing. And then they make the argument that we have talked with Russia before the meeting. This probably indicates that if we already talked with Russia and consultation is key and they didn't know what they were doing before and this is the plan that they then implement, that Russia would have to freak out. This is a bad argument coming out of the MOC. The next argument I want you to extend across is the fact that they, the 12th argument is a term that indicates that we allow development because in the status quo it's too risky to be able to invest because there's no there's no investment going in because of the fact that they're not able to produce because their currency is too expensive. Deflation pressure is preventing foreign direct investment from allowing the production to actually take place. This means that Russia's investment is ultimately useless without the affirmative plan. Means we get a large risk of a link turn, even if their scenario is a little bit more quote-unquote specific. All they're saying is that the EU would not be as valuable, like the euro would not be as valuable. The euro will inevitably collapse. They have conceded this argument, which indicates that after the economy collapses, Russia can't invest in the European Union economy. It means that this dissat is inevitable. Furthermore, I think we're just going to win the magnitude debate that indicates that nuclear war of extinction globally it probably outweighs your dissat. But additionally, I want the 14th argument that indicates that economic collapse inevitably means that Russia can't invest and the pigs will also be that won't be considered a walking risk. This means that this dissat ultimately not.
No, extend the argument that Russia will buy our bonds. And
Instead across the 12th argument indicates that Russia would be able to buy the European Union bonds after we eliminate it from a national bank. They have conceded functionally this argument. All that they say is that they would be devalued and that there's no reason Russia would want to do it. You concede that empirically China does this with the United States would indicate that it creates a global economic interdependence. But furthermore, they've already made arguments as to why Russia wants to invest in the first place. That's the premise of the dissat. Yeah.
That specifically, though, that bond market is a new market for Russia to invest.
Furthermore, this bond market that is a new market for Russia to invest in. They concede this argument indicates that there is at least a risk of a link turn go to the EU advantage. I want to extend across the third warrant on the first argument indicates that the cost of insurance debt is also at record highs and has been rising since 2010. Indicates that debt will overlap the European Union and the status quo. They've also conceded arguments about how the housing bubble has structurally depressed the economy that indicates that securities surrounding those industries are not being able to rise because people will not invest in them. But additionally, the gross domestic product is just not enough for the European Union to be able to hang on in the status quo that indicates that economic collapse is inevitable in the status quo. They have conceded every single warning as to why economic collapse happens. Sirs, is that without the ability to increase production, it means that pigs will inevitably become too dependent on subsidies that increases inflation ultimately means that there's no way to be able to solve back for. They conceded this argument. They also see the fifth argument that indicates collapse goes global because German manufacturing goes global, but also because the 2008 housing market proves that it does in fact go global, but this would be worse. Impacts. They say that they access this faster. It does not matter. You do not have a unique impact scenario. They've conceded that there's no investment coming now, which indicates that there will be a war that is upcoming. And decrease in production means that collapse is inevitable in the status quo. This results in nationalism. We have empirical examples of Great Britain in the 1700s and Germany in World War I and World War II. They have conceded this argument that also that it erodes interdependence, that turns back their Russia dissat anyway, because there would not be any kind of economic interdependence in a world of this kind of economic collapse. This leads to nations to jockeying for resources, and they launch nuclear weapons that causes extinction. They have conceded this argument, outweighs the dissat, plain and simple. Poverty.
You need to answer this argument right now.
What argument?
The argument is that the background argument that Germany doesn't want to invest in pigs now.
Go to solvency. Extended cost that they conceded that the state versus national the state versus national analysis that indicates it's not as risky as when the European Central Bank does it as they're doing in the status quo when it's all spread out. They've conceded this argument. Additionally, they've also conceded the argument that it's unstable in the status quo. There's 775 million bonds being viewed as unstable is the status quo. It's too risky for people to invest. Only the Aff has a risk of being able to solve that. They do not have a unique impact scenario in this debate. We are winning a magnitude claim that completely outweighs the dissad. There's no way you don't vote Aff in this debate.
It's a good debate, you know.
And so by the closest margin, I end up voting negative to the this bound. This bound, I think, is probably the best round that I've watched this weekend. And unfortunately, I feel like it basically comes down to one argument. And that argument is the question of the link turn, and that is, will Russia buy these Eurozone bonds or will they not? The reason that becomes the sole question in this debate is because, well, first of all, let's talk about impact banking. You're banking too much on our impact's going to inevitably happen when they're going through the same impact, and they are probably winning that it's going to be a faster time frame. Because they're right, you do not have a warrant for why economic collapse inevitable means economic collapse is going to happen within the next month. Like they're making pretty good empirics about why Europe has had these problems for a couple of years since the Eurobond crisis, meaning that there's no specific reason for why a collapse of the Eurozone would occur prior to the DISAD. Which means that I think that they have several persuasive arguments about why the DISAD timeframe occurs faster. And additionally, I think that they also make some arguments that are not answered, that I guess the magnitude of the impact of poverty would be higher in the world of the negative economic collapse because of natural gas supplies getting cut off. You don't have an argument about why the economic collapse in the world of the affirmative would also result in some sort of natural gas disruption, meaning that I think that is if I needed it, a nitty-picky sort of piece of offensive differential that I could look at. However, I don't think that the impact framing in this round becomes much of a question, because I think that the biggest issue is whether or not there's actually a link to the DISAD. And the reason this is because, and I'm kind of frustrated, because I think that coming out of the MG, you are ahead in this debate, especially because I think that you have a ton of really, really smart defensive answers, both on the uniqueness level of the DISAD, as well as on the internal link level of the DISAD, that just do not go for in the PMR. So for example, I think that you make several persuasive arguments on uniqueness about why Crimea matters, about why EU interdependence is coming now on the status quo, and these are never extended. I also think that you make a lot of pretty solid arguments about why there's at least some insularity, there's some EU insularity from the natural gas cutoff, meaning that I think that you could at least, a valid PMR strategy would be to really just go hard in on the defensive internal link and uniqueness mitigation argument, and then try to argue that the magnitude of the economic collapse in the world of the app is way worse than whatever economic collapse occurs in the world of the negative. That strategy, I think, would win you the debate. The problem is that you basically extend one uniqueness argument, and it's the question, and it's just like, it's just the ECB was already going to do something, but I think they're right on the question that we have no idea what that's going to be. And additionally, they make arguments about the consultation process that are not really responded to in the MG. Like the new PMR argument is a little bit too little too late for me. But more frustratingly, on the bottom part of the internal link, the only argument you really go for defensively is that the US can fill in for natural gas supplies. However, the warrants that you make are new in the PMR, and additionally, you happen to have me in a joke, which is kind of unfortunate because I know everything about the US energy industry, and I know that their block argument is right. Like the infrastructure to transport natural gas from the US to Europe is non-existent. Like it cannot be done right now. It could be done down the road, but right now we have like one LNG terminal, and it's in like Alaska, I think. There's not really any sort of infrastructure available for us to export that immediately, meaning that I don't think that the US could fill in for a shutoff in the natural gas supply. Additionally, the other frustrating thing is I think you should make the argument they turned off the gas before. I don't think they would keep it off for that long again, because if they keep it off for very long, Russia is kind of fucking themselves. That's like 80% of their economy, so I don't think they would really turn it off for that long, but that argument is never made. So that comes up to, that sort of leads me back up to this link argument about the question of whether or not Russia would buy Eurozone bonds. The persuasive argument that you make is that these Eurozone bonds are super safe investment, solid gold, because they're backed up by the collective weight of the Eurozone. The problem is that logic does not make sense in the context of the DISAD story, which is Russia wants to punish the EU. I don't understand why Russia would want to buy Eurozone bonds in the same scenario where it is trying to choke off Europe's natural gas supplies because it wants to punish them. Like, you need to pair this link turn analysis with some sort of link defense that indicates that Russia would not want to punish Europe for this specific policy. which is not made at any point in this debate. So you would need to make arguments to the extent that Russia would buy these bonds because it wouldn't want Europe to collapse. That level of argumentation is what will let this link turn provide you with more powerful offense, because as it stands, intuitively it doesn't make sense to me. The Nevada's arguments about Russia being upset over devaluation intuitively make more sense to me in the context of a linked story that Russia wants to basically fuck the EU. And so the consistency of the negative link responses to this link turn means that I think that there's a pretty strong chance that Russia would not buy these Eurozone bonds, which would mean that in that instance, then the disad impact would probably happen with a much faster time frame. It turns the case, right? Even if economic collapse is inevitable, it happens faster, than probably worse. So that's basically how I vote.
Yeah, that makes
Any
sense.
questions?
No.
I do. My only question is, if economic collapse is inevitable in the status quo, even if we make it faster, if there's any risk the Aff solves, then like, I guess what I'm asking, if you do you give the Aff a risk of solving?
The Aff cannot solve economic collapse if it is occurring as a consequence of the disad. Right? If the EU economy is fucked up because Russia turns off the natural gas, then all of the uniqueness about that assumes that the current economic conditions are recoverable don't matter, because the plan would be operating in a world where there's already economic collapse. And you don't identify how that $175 billion bond package would be sufficient to counter the effects of Russia cutting off natural gas. That is the work that you have to do in order to make that argument.
Okay, no, thank you.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Probably the best creative judge of this tournament. Great job.
Thanks, Dick.
Thank you.